Hi there, my name's Nikki from Filestage, and today I have the honor of being joined by Peter Friedman. So Peter is a living legend in the ad world. He's been a TV commercial and video producer for 5 decades and has worked with everyone. Big brands like Nike, top agencies like McCann Erickson, and the biggest stars in the world, including Michael Jordan. And he has generously offered to chat with me today about all things advertising, storytelling, and working with the greats. But first, most importantly, Peter, could you please tell us about your book? I really enjoyed reading it, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about what prompted you to make the book now and what the process was like.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you so much for having me. The book was something that I wanted to do for so many years. I realized early on in my career that I was very lucky throughout the entire time. I sort of just met the right people and gravitated and whatnot. And I learned a lot of lessons in the process. During the pandemic, during COVID, one of my dear friends, Donna Holly, called me up and she said, "Your stories are so great. We love your stories. I tell your stories all the time. Why don't we record your stories on Zoom and you make a book?" And I said, "Who cares? No one's going to want to read my stories. I'm just one of 10,000 people that do what I do." And she said, "No, we're going to do it." So we took a year during the pandemic and we recorded 71 chapters. And she had all the transcripts, obviously. And then the question was, what do you do with them? Because, transcripts are one thing, but they need to be put into a story and put into a book. And one of my dear friends who runs an advertising agency in Connecticut named Grant Copeland said, I want to write the book. He's a terrific writer. He's an artist. He's just brilliant. And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I can't pay you. I mean, he said, "It's not about the money." He says, "I've always wanted to write a book." So shorten the story, he took 2 years of his life, working at night, working crazy, whatever. He has a wonderful family and a full-time job. And he wrote a book. He designed the book. He put it all together. He's unbelievable. And we self-published it. Wow. And to our surprise, we put it on Amazon, and it became a bestseller for a short while, for humorous memoirs or something along that category.
Amazing. It's definitely humorous. I really enjoyed it. I loved the B-rolls as well. So we got the bigger stories and the B-rolls. So that was very clever.
Thank you.
And yes, we'll get more into some of the specific stories later. No spoilers, but I want to start with questions more about your career, because you have a career spanning 50 years, which in the industry is quite a feat in itself. But I really wanted to know how the creative process has evolved over that time, or what has stayed the same. Are there parts of it where you feel like this is the same as 50 years ago, and other parts that are unrecognizable, or what's your thought?
That's a great question. Let's start off by saying creative is still the king. Okay. And if you look at what's on TV, at least in the States, the creative product has become less effective. There are a lot of reasons for that, and we'll get into some of those. You still need to start with a brief, something that the client wants, right? Basic. And I don't care whether it's written, shorthand, or if it's written in hieroglyphics, you still have to start with a brief. Okay. And then you need creative. You need people to take that brief and understand the brand and whatnot and turn it into an idea. What's happening, I'm afraid, is that there's far fewer good ideas today, not because the teams are not as talented as they were years ago, but I think that they have less freedom. They have much less freedom. And when I worked at McCann and Nike and whatnot, and for Samsung, we could make fun of ourselves. We could make fun of certain types of people without worrying about repercussions, because it was advertising. It was content. It was entertainment. Let's not forget, advertising is entertainment, first. When I worked for Nike and we tried to sell a movie, and we sold the movie and everyone was excited, and I came back and I pitched it to the head guy at Nike, and he said, "We're not in the entertainment business. We're in the shoe business." And I said, "Michael Jordan is not entertainment. Are you nuts?" And he said, "No, we're not doing it." So, there are times like that you just kind of shake your head, but creative is king. And I found out over the years that the simpler ideas are the best ideas. Don't get complicated. You have 30 seconds, mostly 60, sometimes 90, sometimes, but it's a short span to tell a story. And if you don't have an idea, you're not going to end up with anything. I have a saying, and it's a terrible thing to say, but I watch ads now. And my thing is, if you see people dancing all the time in the ads, there's no idea there.
Yeah.
There's no idea. You have people dancing and they're dancing outside or inside, whatever. That's not an idea. That's an execution. That's not an idea. What's the idea of the commercial? What are you trying to say? So it's changed a lot. And I don't think it's changing for the better.
No, I would agree. I remember actually reading that story in your book about the movie, and I was getting excited, and then we got to the last page. There's red tape. Red tape exists everywhere, unfortunately.
Yes.
In your book, you mentioned that you always wanted to work in film or TV commercials in particular. What do you think drew you to that world at such a young age? And well, we've sort of touched on this already, but do you still feel the same way when you see TV commercials today?
Yeah. Well, when I work on
the commercial, right?
When I work on my own commercials and stuff, and I do still produce, I have one or two clients that I love to work for, and I will only work for them at this stage. But what drew me to commercials was it's a short time span. The beauty of it is you're working backwards from a date. Now, those dates most of the time are artificial. Your account, we have to have this because we're going on. And then there was always an extra week or two because they lied to you in the first place and whatever. But that was part of the game. And we would play the game back at them. You'll have it by next Thursday. And even, I knew they were never going to have it by Thursday, but whatever. But that's what drew me. It was short and there was a time span. It was very concentrated. And the other thing about commercials that I love to this day is that you work with different people. In other words, you're doing a commercial 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever, sometimes 12 weeks, if animation, CGI, all those, but there's a finite time limit and you're working with a group. Now, if you love those people, hopefully you'll work with them again. If you don't get along with those people or they're difficult or it's not a fun process, then okay, I got 12 weeks to deal with John. He's a pain in the butt, but I'm going to move on and work with somebody else on the next round.
That's very true, actually. I hadn't thought of that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you're not locked in for a 2-year movie stint, for example.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And we'll get a bit more into the people side of things later. We've got some questions on that because that is such a big part of your career and your strengths and your role. But I wanted to ask you what the most challenging campaign you have maybe worked on or ever produced in your career, and do you have any advice from that experience?
Well, that's another great question. I had a bunch of different challenging campaigns because I was the kind of person that never said, what if I turned that job down at Nike? What if it would be so much easier to stay at BBD, I'd probably be a rich man now instead of still working. But I always wanted, the challenge, and I got many of them. Nike, very difficult in many cases because the time frames, the athletes were not available. And then when you finally could lock an athlete in, you can lock Jordan in, you had 2 hours. Well, what do you mean we have 2 hours? You got 2 hours. You got 2 hours with Kobe, figure it out. Well, you can't do it in 2 hours. We have 22 scenes with him. Well, you get a double, figure it out, shoot it from the back, whatever. So those were difficult, but incredibly rewarding also, because you really had to work with the agencies. I mean, for me, again, I'll keep saying how lucky I was. I had the opportunity at Nike to work with the best agency at the time, and probably still in the world, which was Wieden & Kennedy. And those guys, in Portland, were spectacular, and they were great. They were great creative people. Were they easy to work with? No, but I respect them because they fought for their ideas and they stood up and they made it happen. They did brilliant work, the Jamie Barretts of the world and whatnot, brilliant work. But probably the most challenging campaigns, dealing with LeBron, maybe at Samsung, because I worked at Samsung, the brand. Time frames, sometimes dealing with egos, sometimes dealing with large groups of people that follow these athletes around in a way. There are many stories that I have of grabbing some agents by the throat and basically throwing them off the stage because I had to, because otherwise you never would have gotten anything shot. Sometimes I have a nickname that unfortunately I earned, and I'm not proud of it, but it's called the Hammer. And
Oh,
there were
wow. Okay.
many occasions. One of my clients says he's a very nice guy. He tells everybody he's a really nice guy. Peter's nice. He's fun to work with. He's a team player, but don't piss him off because he will go he will go ballistic. So there are times that I really did do that, and not proud of myself. I had a campaign that I was working with 72 and Sunny, great agency for Samsung, and we were doing a Rihanna project, and it was a very difficult project. The project itself was enormously difficult. We had to build all these sets. It was $7-8 million in production,
Wow.
which was a ton of money. And
Yeah.
we had all these stages at Fox, booked in LA. And we had so many problems with our talent not showing up and showing up late and not wanting to hold the product. And I was, what do you mean you don't want to hold the product? You signed a $20 million contract and you don't want to hold the product. So those were some of the really, really difficult moments that you had to negotiate. We did a job for Nike, and we were shooting a remake of I won't go into the names, but from stars that showed up, and then, well, I wanted a silk suit. I don't want a cotton suit. The one I used in my show was a silk suit. I'm not going out until I get a silk suit. So you're dealing with personalities. You're dealing with egos. You're dealing with agents that in most cases never told their athlete what they're supposed to do. That happens all the time. They would show up and say, okay, and you give them, well, I'm not doing this. Well, they show this to you. No. But challenging many campaigns for Nike. But you know what? At the end of the day, you ended up with some amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff.
That's how it's born. Yeah.
We talked about failure. We talked about Fun Police. There were always issues on all of those things in terms of schedules and whatnot. But I really can't pinpoint one. I think the Rihanna job probably was the most difficult because she was not easy to work with. She was extraordinarily talented, which she is. We all know that. She's a beautiful woman. She just has her way of working, and doesn't really coexist with production because she's on her own timeline.
You alluded to that in the book. Actually, I read that. You also said something interesting that I liked, where you sort of said that your role in a lot of these big sort of jobs was like an umpire. Ideally, you're sort of not there, but sometimes the umpire has to come in and lay down the law a little, right?
The best producer is an invisible producer. I was taught that early on, and I said, what does that mean? They said, stay out of the way. You're not the talent. You're not the director. Leave your ego at the door, shut up, listen, and anticipate. If you're going to be a good producer, you got to anticipate what's going to go wrong, obviously, before it goes wrong. Simple little things like, well, it's supposed to rain tomorrow. What are we going to do? We're outdoors on a beach. Do we have a plan B? Well, we never thought about that. Well, let's start thinking about it. I mean, all those little things. What happens if he doesn't show up? Well, we'll get the double in there and whatnot. I mean, there are occasions when I shot a thing last year with J-Lo for my Dolby client, who I love, Todd Pendleton, who's brilliant. And I worked with Todd for 29 years at Nike, and then at Samsung, he was a CMO, and then now he's at Dolby. And we showed up, we had 100 cars in a traffic jam in LA that we put together, and J-Lo was going to come and dance on it. It was a brilliant production. The client gets there and he says, Pete, everything looks great, but we can't use that car that she's going to dance on. I said, well, what do you mean? Well, she's coming in an hour. We got 100 cars behind her. And he said, well, we're doing this with Mercedes, and we got to find a Mercedes instead of the Cadillac that we had in there. I said, well, we have 1 hour to find a Mercedes on a Saturday that we can buy and put into and we figured it out. Great production. We went and bought a Mercedes, drove it over, and whatever. And she never knew, and nobody ever knew. But there was stuff like that if you can anticipate, not that you always can. Yeah. That's the hardest part about our job. And stay out of the way. Let people do their jobs. It's what you're paying them for.
That's good advice. Now, is there an ad, Peter, that you wish you'd worked on? Maybe so over the last, 50 years or whatever, even before, that you wish that you'd been part of?
Oh boy, there's a bunch of them. The Nike ads. I got to Nike. I missed the flying commercial. The flying commercial was the first commercial that Michael Jordan ever ever really flew. Now, I've been on a lot of shoots with Michael, and it was spectacular to watch the man work. He's just brilliant. But I missed that one because that was that slow motion commercial where he just came in and nobody had ever done that before.
It's incredible.
And you saw the poetic beauty of this guy. I mean, he was so much better than everybody else. I was sorry, I missed working on that one.
Yeah, that's a great one. Now, we've just spoken about Nike, but you were the first global head of television production for Nike.
Yes.
And you also worked on some of the most loved ad spots in history, some that I absolutely love: Revolution, Black Mamba, Kobe's retirement commercial, Symphony, the list goes on. What is your favorite spot that you've worked on during that time?
Well, Revolution I didn't work on. That was before.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So that was one that I wish I had worked on. No. Oh God. I think the Black Mamba spot, which was a film we turned into a 7-minute film, Radical Media produced it. They did a terrific job. Kobe was amazing. Bruce Willis was in it. Kanye was in it. You know, we had a major amount of talent. And it was like 7 days of shooting, 7 nights. That was an amazing shoot. There was too many of them. The airport commercial. I went down to Brazil and we shot the Brazilian soccer team. And of course, you know, they don't speak English and I didn't speak Portuguese. And,
right.
that
can cause some problems, I'm sure.
problem. And we shot at one of the airports over Christmas holiday because it's the only time the team was together. And it was like rounding up sheep because they were all with their girlfriends and family. And we could only shoot at night because the terminals were closed. And, you know, so you shot 5 nights in a row. I mean, but those were experiences, and John Woo directed. I mean, those were experiences that you could never replace. And I don't think you could do them today either, only because budgets aren't there, you know, and there's too many shills now. You know, we worked at Nike. You had a few Nike athletes, but the air wasn't loaded with celebrities and everybody. You turn on the Super Bowl, every ad has a celebrity. You know, there's no relation to the product, but let's throw a celebrity in because, you know, whatever. That's not advertising. I mean, but Nike had a connection with the talent. Every one of those guys that I worked with, and some were really bad and some were amazing. Most of them were nice. And if you know how to work with talent on that level, you know, and you don't go in there and you don't become a yes man. You don't kiss their butts and all that stuff. You're there to work. You're there to do your job. They respect you and you respect them.
Of course. Yeah, that's good. And so we work with a lot of brands and agencies, and one of the biggest struggles is the approval process. So it's like that we often get the feedback that's the biggest blocker they face. How does that look on these big TV spots like that at Nike? How does the approval process look, or what is the main sort of like challenge or blocker that you've seen?
Well, I can only talk about the time that I was there, okay? Because I know it's different now, and Nike's having some issues and whatnot. Most of the creative people and marketing people are gone, and you know, time that's normal. Time erodes, erodes these folks. They move on, but the approval process at Nike was so spectacular. It was so different than anything I'd ever worked on. I'd worked at BB before on Pepsi and all these other things. Yeah. And it was a belabored, you know, it was a process. It was the budget was drawn out and the approvals, and the creative was, you know, tested and beaten to death before you even got out there. Nike was amazing. I mean, we had guys I remember Fun Police sitting in a room, Chris Zimmerman, who was the head of US advertising, you know, the CMO, and a couple of the other guys on it, you know, Todd Pendleton and a few of the other Nike guys in a room. And they come into the room and they said, okay, we got this great idea. It's called Fun Police. And we're sitting there looking at each other going, ooh, what's this? And this was during the basketball strike. And Jamie Barrett gets up on the table. He gets up on the table, the conference room. This guy is a big guy anyway. And he turns on some music and he starts singing and dancing. And he's pitching the idea about the Fun Police, like through a song that he wrote, or, you know, and we sat there and went, now tell me something. How could you test that? How could you test that? Possible. So Chris, and we all looked around, and Chris, great leader. And he said, this is fabulous. Let's do it. We did so much stuff. Nike never tested a commercial, an idea ever. Now we would overshoot. We'd maybe shoot 10 commercials and we'd get 7 But that was the client mentality. It wasn't only about the data, which it is today. There was no data. You went with your gut. You went with your gut. And if it worked, which it did, you look at the results. Nike, obviously, in those days was spectacular. But the key really was working with great agency people, when you're on the brand side. When I was on the agency side, same thing,
Yeah, definitely. No, I think the gut feeling is something that's maybe we're lacking a bit more. That's what's super interesting.
Yes.
So we talked about at the start, sort of, obviously you've worked with some incredibly famous, some of the best athletes and performers of our generation. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about those types of connections.
Sure.
And I wanted to start with a little quote from your book. So your book's had a lot of praise, but I like this stuck out to me. It was a comment from John Boyler, who was the former CEO of 72 and Sunny. And he said, for Peter, it's never just been about the production. It's always been about the people. So obvious question, but I think you're very qualified to answer. What is your advice for working with people, especially these sort of living legends where maybe there's more of an ego than your average Joe?
Well, first, let's address John Boyler. John, when we worked, and this was at Samsung, and Todd Pendleton was the CMO, and he came over from Nike, and John Boyler was just starting out 72 and Sunny. I think he had 25 people, 30 people, one client, and we had worked with John, both of us, at Nike. He was one of the brilliant guys at Wieden & Kennedy and created, and he left and set up his own agency. And there was just an amazing chemistry. John Boyler is a brilliant creative person. John Boyler is a people person. And what do I mean by that? People respect working for him. There are a lot of creative people on his level that are total a-holes. Okay, my way or no way. And, and it's, I don't care what you say, I'm the boss. John was never like that. And that's why he built an agency. He and his partner built an agency that was so successful because the people around it was chemistry. I'm telling you, it was the chemistry, and it was magic. The production people, the creative people that he brought in, they were tough. They were hard to work with because they would fight for everything. And 9 out of 10 times they were right. John Boyler and Todd Pendleton together, the CMO, was, I think, a once in a generation combination. Because John would come up with an idea and Todd as the client, and that was it. Todd was the end of the discussion. He liked it, we did it. And the chemistry, if I can give you one brief example, we did a terrific shoot for Fanboys. Fanboys was a big campaign for Samsung. It was about all the waiting in line for Apple and, and here's whatever. And we shot the first day on the first campaign, and everybody was celebrating after. We did great. We broke, and let's grab a beer. And we're all sitting around. Let's talk about tomorrow. The hammer would always come over and say, hey, before you guys go, we got to, okay, in a nice way. And John and everybody was, wow, we did a great job. And Todd goes, we didn't get it. So what do you mean we didn't get it? We didn't get it. We missed it. And John goes, we were concerned. First day, it was $150,000 in those days, $200,000, a lot of money, talent. Yeah. And we sat down and Todd said, well, here's what we did wrong. And he listed all these things that we didn't get, that we needed to get. It won't cut it, whatever. This is your client. Wow. But he's brilliant. And he's forget about a marketing guy. And Boyler sat there and he worked it out with him. Now, most guys on his level and John's level would have said, screw you. I'm we're the agency. No. He said, know what? You're right. Let's do this. Let's talk about it. Let's reshoot this tomorrow. Let's figure it out. The chemistry behind that's what made that magical. So again, you work with people. It's all about the people. If you hire the right people and you stay out of their way, as we talked about, okay, you leave your own ego at the door. Okay, forget it. You're not the star here. The producer's not the star. You make it happen. You put all these people together and then you shut up. And you unless there's obviously a problem, and then you have to step in.
And the hammer comes in.
and you do what you have to do, which is ugly, but has to be done. Somebody has to do it, And remember one very important thing about a producer. If the commercial turns out great, you had nothing to do with it. It was a creative idea. It was the director. If the commercial turns out to be a stinker, God, that producer was terrible. He just couldn't make it happen, and we didn't have the right clothes. And so, it's kind of a funny thing, but that's one of the producer's credos in life. You live by that, you die by that.
It's good to know for any budding producers out there. Good
Yeah.
to know what to expect.
But legends, working with to answer your question, when you work with the celebrities and whatnot, you have to appreciate who they are, and how they got there. They didn't get there overnight. These people were gifted. They were born gifted, most of them, obviously, and they worked excruciatingly hard to develop that talent. Now, whatever the means were, whatnot. And the most important thing when you're working with living legends is to realize that the biggest fear is that one day they'll wake up and they won't have it anymore. The biggest fear is, oh my God, I'm going to be too old. I'm not going to be cute. I'm not going to, whatever it may be, I'm going to lose my shot. I'm Steph Curry and oh my God, I can't make a 3-pointer. They wake up with that every day and they have to live up to that. So they have to create this aura about themselves. They have to believe in themselves, sometimes too much, and I don't respect them for that. But other times they're special. They are special people, but they put their pants on the same way you and I do. And if you don't kowtow to them and you talk to them like they're normal people, they will appreciate that because nobody in their world does.
Right, exactly. They're not used to it. Now I'm going to move on to storytelling because I have said here that storytelling is in your bones. I really loved your book. For me, it's a really nice mix of insights into what it's like to work with these sort of like huge stars, like when you had a cigar with Michael Jordan, but also the glimpses for me were super interesting behind the scenes of the ad world because I think we're all fascinated by it. I'm going to just quickly share one of my favorite stories, which was hearing the background behind the Fun Police, which we've mentioned briefly, which were the Fun Police commercials you worked on during your time at Nike. But I just wanted to know really what drew you to storytelling, and basically what was the biggest difference between storytelling in a book, like Write and I'll Get the Tip, and storytelling on a a TV commercial or an ad spot?
Sure, or a film, or a shorter
film, exactly.
We're doing so many short 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 for the web. There wasn't a web at one time, in this world. There were 3 networks, and that was it. The biggest difference really is that in a book, you have unlimited amount of time to write it. It could be as long as you want. When you're dealing with the editors and the publishers or whatnot, they're going to bring you back to earth. It's very difficult. Oh, I love that chapter. Well, it doesn't fit. So goodbye. It's that, well, I love it. Well, it's done. In a commercial, you have 30 seconds to tell a story. And you have to be a brilliant writer to be able to get your message across in 30 seconds. Okay. And you have to keep it simple. Don't try to sell 5 ideas in 30 seconds. It's not going to work. It has to be one idea. And usually if we talk about failure, which we might do a little bit later, what a brilliant idea. And when they sold that to Michael, he said, okay, they never thought he'd even buy that because it talked about him, missing 6,000 shots in my life. And, what a simple idea. This is the greatest athlete that ever lived. And he's talking about his failures. I mean, how many people would even come up with that idea? So that was Wyden and Kennedy again, and the brilliance that they had. But to me, it's being able to work in a 30-second and a 60-second time frame, which is the most difficult. And you'll know when you're there if you got it or not. When you start looking at the dailies and you realize, holy shit, we didn't get that shot. We didn't get that shot. You start worrying.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I can imagine that. Now you've mentioned failure. So this is one of the questions. Let's get into it. Talk us through the behind the scenes of a shoot like Failure. What did it look like? What did it feel like?
It was amazing. I think we had two different commercials that we shot. First of all, we had a very young director, this gentleman who is super famous now, Mark Romanek, directed it. And Mark has gone on to direct everything. He's brilliantly talented. He's a pain in the butt to work with because he's one of those guys, but he is brilliant and you have to just tip your hat to him. This was one of the first commercials that he directed. He was very picky about what he had done. He was at a company called Propaganda at the time, which was, with Michael Bay and all these other fellas. And, but there was something magical about it because the idea was simple. The location was simple. We were at Soldier Field in Chicago, shooting in the winter, which is brutally cold. Okay. I mean, it was really bitter cold. There's no heat. You're in a stadium, football stadium, and you're in the bowels of it. And just finding a location that was perfect. It was just a wall. and it was a door, and one guy standing at the door, and Michael. Now, what did he wear? The idea that he came in a coat. Well, would he come in a coat? What would he wear? Those discussions? They're so simple and minute, but on a commercial where you're on one guy for 30 seconds in slow motion, and he's walking 25 feet and opens a door, everything has to be perfect. So we did it and rehearsed it so many times. There's a gentleman named Nigel Miguel. Nigel is a Belizean. He's like my brother. He's a Belizean. And he's Michael's double. At least he was. He played in the NBA. He looks a lot like Michael, the same build and whatnot. And Nigel did a lot of the choreography for Nike basketball, but he also did all the double work. There was a lot of shots that Michael didn't do, didn't need to do, walking or some other things or jumping. Basketball he did. Obviously, you're not going to fake it. There's only one guy can do what he does. But we rehearsed it and rehearsed it and rehearsed it. Michael showed up. Michael was impeccable. He would show up on time. He would drive himself. No posse, no, not. He had a couple of security guys, and they were popping his guys. They were all Chicago police guys. They were never in this. They were always out of the way. And he would just walk on the set and say, "Show me what Nigel did." So we'd look at the tape, and he'd see it, and he'd go, "Got it, okay." And then Michael would do it perfect the first time. Perfect. Second time he would do it perfect. And we'd go, "Hey, we're done." And that's what it was. It was just magic, and while they were setting up, I used to smoke cigars in those days. I went out to the alleyway where the stairs are, and I lit up a cigar. We're in between takes, and I had my own time. And I hear the footsteps coming out the door, and there's Michael, and he sits down next to me. He says, "What are you smoking?" Michael's a big cigar smoker. Used to be. I don't know if he still is. And I said, "Oh, Michael, you don't want to smoke. This is last week's newspaper. This is like $5 cigar. You smoke $50, cigars." He said, "No, I didn't bring any." I said, "Well, I got one." I gave him a cigar. We lit up. And I'm thinking to myself, and I know this is in the book, but I'm thinking to myself, is this real? I'm sitting here talking to Michael Jordan. We're talking about politics or, sport or whatever. We're smoking cigars, and I'm getting paid for this. It was like, are you kidding me? So that gets back to being lucky. I mean, just lucky to be able to work with great people. And really, I don't think I did anything special in my life other than just be super lucky. And I knew how to work with people, but I don't care about my ego. It has nothing to do with me. The book is not about me. If you read the book, it's really about the people.
Yeah, definitely.
Bill Clinton and all those guys, dealing with, wow, how did this guy, he remembered everybody on the crew. I mean, I never worked with anybody in all those years who remembered and wanted to know who the crew was. But Bill Clinton said, "Thank you, John. Thank you, Bill." How did you do that? Well, that's what he does. That's part of his extraordinary talent. So again, I know I'm drifting here a little bit, but when you work with people that have those talents like a Michael Jordan and can perform on the highest level, Michael has to win in everything he does. I mean, everybody knows that now. But he doesn't win, and that includes performance. He has to do the best performance. He doesn't want to be told, "Do it again." And rarely was he told, "Do it again."
That's amazing. And did he have any sort of say in the sort of the final approval, or he just came in, did his, so he would step in?
He would send everything to the athletes and whatnot and the agents. Okay. And I don't remember ever at Nike ever having a problem with, because the work was so good, that there was pushback. Now at Samsung, we had a lot of pushback dealing with the artists. I mean, I dealt with a lot of artists and whatnot on those Camp Bieber and, all these J-Lo and all these people. And there's always pushback. But there's a difference between an artist and an athlete. You can't recreate Michael Jordan flying through the air. I mean, that's it. The music artists are totally a different group. It's a different set of egos and whatnot. And you have to learn how to deal with that. And the comments that you would get would be sometimes so ridiculous. Had nothing to do with anything, but you would have to address them, and it made it more difficult when they became petty.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, it's so interesting because the sort of advertising, like the film industries, they show the culture and the changing culture of who is considered the top and how they interact with you. It's super interesting in the book. You sort of see that play out, and the difference. It's quite clear even from small anecdotes, the difference between the athletes and the artists and what mindset they're coming in with. Super interesting.
They're afraid. They're on top now. A week from now, the next kid could come along. The next Christina Aguilera could come along. The next, whatever can come along, and all of a sudden you're out. They're terrified of that.
Is this like fragility there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of award-winning, you have contributed to hundreds of award-winning campaigns yourself, from prestigious competitions like the Clio Awards. So I have a question here, the one I'm actually super interested in hearing your opinion on, but what do you think separates an award-winning campaign from a merely effective one?
Well, let's first start with award-winning campaigns don't mean they're good commercials.
That's true. That's very true.
You can have a great campaign that was terrific for the creative people because they got it. Now they got it on the reel and they're going to get a better job. Did it sell more product? No. Most people don't think about that. So let's look at it. Award-winning campaigns are funny. They're entertaining. They're storytelling. They're emotional. Okay. They or all of the above. Usually comedy, if you're a brilliant comedy writer and whatnot, you're going to win an award, but that doesn't mean you're going to sell the product. You look at Super Bowl today, every commercial had a celebrity in it. 90% of those celebrities have no relationship to that client whatsoever. Okay, none. And they're just thrown in there and they're not shills, they're actors and they're getting paid a lot of money to do what they do. But does that make it a good commercial? What's a good commercial? A good commercial for a client is something that sells product, right? Now, I'm not saying stand there and hold the box up for 30 seconds. That's a good commercial because you sold the product. No, there's a blend. And that was the magic. And it also depends what you're selling. I mean, Nike was selling a feeling, a brand, okay? They weren't selling sneakers. They were selling a feeling. It's like you wanted to be part of that because athletes were part of that. And who bought all the Nike product? No athletes, all the old guys like me and all the young kids, they wanted to be aspirational. They want, again. So when you saw Nike ads and you believe in the athletes because they wore the product, they weren't just shilling. To me, that's what's an award-winning commercial is something that affects everybody. Everybody reacts either emotionally, positive, negatively, whatever. But that doesn't mean it's a good commercial. So there is a delineation, and clients know this. They won 100 awards, but look, show me the results. Did the product go up? No. And you spend how many millions of dollars on the Super Bowl? Uh-oh.
That's very true. Very true. Very interesting. So now in your career, you're doing a lot of work as a mentor, right? Do you have a piece of advice that you always share with emerging creatives, or maybe a word of warning, whatever it is? Sure. Anything that you find yourself saying over and over again to upcoming creatives? Yes,
very good question. Thank you. And very important because it is different today. The process for the agency folks is much different. All right. In most cases, it's much more complicated. It's much scarier now with all the data driven. Everything is data driven. There's no emotion anymore. You can't test an emotional idea. You cannot test an emotional idea. You can throw it out to 100 people and they're looking at a piece of paper or they're looking at a drawing. How can you get emotion from that? I mean, it's very, very difficult. So my advice has always been respect everybody. When you're starting out in the business or whether you're on top, perfect example of John Boyler. He's on top, but he respects everybody. He respected me and I was the client, and I was like the bad guy because I was the guy, well, it's too much money, whatever. But we always worked stuff out. So respect everybody, have patience, leave your ego at the freaking door, okay? And hire people, work with people that are better than you. I was so lucky. I worked with the most amazing creative people. Sorry, shut this off. When I was at Scally McCabe and McCann and brilliant writers and directors. And I appreciated it. I really appreciated it. And I would tell everybody, respect everybody, treat everybody the same. The guy on the crew, the lowest person on the crew someday is going to be a producer and might hire you. And boy, has that ever happened. And in my life, I've seen people that used to PA for me now that are great directors. And, but I treated them with, you go up to the crew afterwards and you thank the guys, you thank the grips, you thank the gaffers. Thank you for your hard work. because they busted their butt for you today. Yeah, they're making good money, but so what? Respect is the most important thing.
That's great advice. You also mentioned in your book about being nimble and sort of being able to accept. Do you think that's been a bit of a secret behind having such a long and decorated career, just being able to adapt because it is such a fast moving and evolving field?
Yes. The reason I'm still here, and again, I was when the dinosaurs used to run around the earth and whatnot, I was producing, it's because you accept newness, you accept change. Everything is going to change, not necessarily for the better, but it's going to change. And what your job is as a producer is to try to stay ahead of it. Is to stay ahead of it. Be nimble. Seek out the latest technologies. It doesn't mean you have to be a techie. I'm not a techie, but I can watch a great editor work, and I understand Adobe and I understand how it works. You have to accept. And I know so many people, editors, friends, whatnot, that just didn't want to keep up. I don't care about this. I don't care about technology. I have to learn it, and I'm still a Luddite. I admit I'm the worst. I'm an idiot, but I force myself to just learn it. So being nimble means working with accepting whatever the trends are, trying to stay with what the trends are. It also means if you don't agree with somebody and if you don't like somebody, it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to put that person down or argue with them. You go with it. You go with the flow and you accept. You're open to change. That's really what it's been. And that's been the story of my life. I like change. I get bored. 3, 4, 5 years of the company and doing the same thing. What's the next challenge? Give me the next challenge. I'm kind of crazy that way, but that's always been my nature.
Hey, it's worked for you anyway. It's worked for you.
Lucky. Again, I keep coming back to that. If you ask me what's the reason for your success, one word: lucky.
Well, I don't know. I think there's a bit more to it, but I would say, I know I've keeping you a bit over time, but I have 2 more questions if you're able to answer them.
Yes,
I'm going to jump into this one because we were just talking about you were just talking about trends and keeping up, and I think we have to talk about AI very briefly. AI, automation, they are rocking the advertising industry in the past couple of years, maybe for the better, maybe for the worst. What impact do you see that having on, we spoke about creativity at the start. Are you optimistic? Are you worried? How do you think it's going to play out?
I'm not optimistic. I have to be honest. I'm not optimistic based on what I hear. It depends how it's used. If it's used as a crutch, if it's used as an aid to help you create, but if it's used as a tool to come up with a music track or come up with an idea, okay, tell me the best way to get this guy from here to here, and it spits out. If it does the work for you and takes the creative element out, the human element out, to me, what makes advertising special is the human part of it. It's a team. It's not a director. It's not a writer. It's everybody on that shoot contributed. And as soon as you realize it's a group effort, then you're going to make your career and you're going to make the work better. AI is not a group effort. AI is a bunch of information that's been fed by somebody or some bodies, and it comes out, it's processed, and it's thrown to you. And if that becomes the nature of the business, what I hate about the business now is that the lawyers are writing half the commercials. Lawyers are not creative. Okay, I love lawyers, but they're not creative. And I would fight with them all the time. I would fight with them. They killed so many wonderful ideas because, oh my God, you can't say that. Now I understand their boundaries. You have to, but there's also, a lawyer gets paid a lot of money, so they think they need to say a lot. All right, to justify their money. I'm worried about the business. I'm worried about, as Scott Ross says, and he knows special effects better than anybody. The special effects world, the world of special effects is going to be CGI is going to be totally dominated by AI very shortly. So the people that are in the business now, these are brilliant technicians, people who worked on Avatar and all this other stuff. They didn't use AI. It was in their mind, and they spent years and whatnot. What happens to that? What happens to that in the future? Does it become dumbed down?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think there's so much in that process that not everything should be done faster, right?
Or cheaper.
Or cheaper, exactly. So we've touched on this, but just if you've any final thoughts on it, you've headed up production for some of the best known agencies in the world. For the agency folks that may watch this, that maybe are struggling with the creative review process, is there any advice to make it a little less contentious or a little more like sort of simplified in any way?
Here's the truth. It all depends on the client.
Yeah.
It all depends on the client and the brand. And they will tell you that. God, I work with so many great young creative people that are frustrated. Okay. They're not working on a brand that they can really show their stuff. You know, you got to earn your stripes. You're not just going to go start off working on the greatest work in the world. But at the end of the day, it's the client. If you have a client that's afraid of losing their job, the average tenure for a CMO is 18 months now. So as soon as the CMO gets in a job, he's already looking for his next job. He's already planting the seeds. You notice you look at IG and it's like, hey, congratulations, congratulate me. I got my new job. Well, what do you think they're doing that for? They're telling the world so that when they get ready for their next job, you know, it'll be out there. The clients are everything. If a client is data-driven, you're going to have a tough time. You're going to have a tough time because you're going to have to go back to that client 100 times with ideas, and they're going to kill most of them because they didn't test well or whatever, or their wife didn't like the color of the whatever, okay? If you find clients that are open to great work and are willing to work with the creative people, that's a turn on for the creative people. They will bust their asses for you. They're there to create. You know, most of them, especially the young ones today, I work with so many brilliant ones, you know, Spring Hill and you know, you work with LeBron's. I work with LeBron's agency for a whole summer, and I work with some young, unbelievably talented creative guys. And the clients, they have Procter & Gamble. But Procter & Gamble, because it was the agency that it was, because it was Wyden and Kennedy, because it was, you know, 72 and Sunny, they attract, it seems to be a symbiotic relationship. They attract better clients because better sponsors because they're better clients. So they have to go hand in hand. And for the young kids or the regular guys that are there now, the people that have been there, it all depends on your client. If he's not going or she's not going to allow you to do your thing, you're going to have a rough road. There's no way around it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the final question for you, Peter. You're the co-founder of Vets to Set and a member of Spectre as well.
Yes.
Has your nonprofit work influenced your perspective on the ad industry at all?
Well, first of all, let's give due credit to Vets to Set. David Cohn, who is a producer and been in the business like myself, used to live right down the street from me in Florida when I worked at the PGA. And he came to me one day and said, Pete, I got a great idea. You know, we have a little downtime. I want to set this company up called Vets to Set. And I said, wow. And he said, this is what it's going to be. We're going to go and we're going to set up a website and we're going to have vets coming back from Afghanistan and they're going to sign up and we're going to get them work in the film business. We're going to get them started as PAs or whatever non-union position you can get them into. He said, David, that's brilliant. Let me help you. Okay. David drove that bus. I helped him bring in websites and all that other stuff. But to this day, 6-7 years later, David is still running it. The greatest happiness in my life, other than my children, obviously. And the first job we did with this vet who came back from Afghanistan, okay, and we got him hired and a crew and we built a website and he signed up and we went through all that stuff. We don't make any money on it. We don't want to make any money on it. It's about getting these people a life. He came back to us the second day and he said, I went home last night and my child asked me what time the commercial was going to be on that night that he worked on. And what did you do today, Daddy? And tell me about the commercial. And he said, Peter, he said, I did 5 tours of volunteer in Afghanistan. He was a drone builder. I mean, the guy was brilliant. He couldn't find a job in LA. He couldn't find a job. Nobody wanted, are you kidding me? So we gave him an opportunity. And to this day, the gentleman is still working. And so many of them have been successful. So many of them don't want to work. So many of them signed up and they have major issues that they can't deal with and they turn the work down. But we help people. And David Cohn is still helping people and should deserve the credit. We didn't want any credit or whatever. Spectre is different. It's kind of a men's group. And I use the word men's lightly. It's just a group of guys that are business people. Okay. They're women also. But and they want to help. Every dollar we raise goes to Boys and Girls Clubs, goes to United Way. We've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every penny goes to them. And that's all they want to do. You know, that we get together and have a dinner every 4 months, whatever. That's not important, or a golf tournament. But we raise $50,000, $60,000 on a golf tournament, and it goes to the boys club and the girls club. So that gives, if you don't do that in your life, if you don't give back at some point, you haven't fulfilled what you're here for. Yes, it's great to see an ad you did and you feel super great, but giving is the best thing in the world. And to me, helping the vets, and I'm not a vet, and David was not a vet, but we understood what they were going through. And again, it was his idea. I helped him. He's still doing it. I still help him barely because he doesn't need any help. Still works. It could be much better, but the production companies embraced it. The website people, we built a great database, and all you do is go up and sign up. And then the production companies go on the day, oh, I need a guy who's worked with Pyro. Oh, this guy's worked with Pyro. They call him and they go hire him.
And do you think that's something, like what's next for Peter Friedman? Do you see more of that in your future, or what's your next plan?
I'm spending 100% of my time now, or 90% of my time on a podcast. I took the book, and I'm working with a wonderful academician right now, this guy, Art Mullengarten, who's a department head. He's a marketing guy. And we spent a year coming up with what we felt was the right formula for a podcast. We have now, fast forward, we raised money. We have recorded 8 podcasts so far. They haven't been released. I'll get the tip. It's just a digital spinoff of the book.
Nice.
It's the same process, peeling back the curtain. Okay, I have Mrs. America coming on this week. I didn't even know there was a Mrs. America.
Me neither.
Her story is amazing. And I have a gentleman who's invented one of the early cancer detection things. I mean, these are amazing people with amazing stories. That's the whole concept. Remarkable people, remarkable stories. Bring them on. Art and I are beautiful 3 cameras. I mean, we did this professionally. We did it right. And we mix. I have a professional mixer and music and all that. But the people are the story. It's not us, and we're peeling back. I have the head of the PGA coming on. I mean, I'm using some of the contacts, yes, that I made. But God, the stories are amazing. And you don't have to be a superstar. We can have superstars. I had Yankee baseball players on, but also real people. I have a pastor who has Tourette's. You try being a pastor and get up in front of 350 people every Sunday with Tourette's and deliver your sermons. The guy's amazing. Wow. I mean, you got to have a lot of guts to do that.
Absolutely.
That's a great story. So we're reaching people on all. It hasn't been released yet. The website's being built. It'll be out in a month, whatever. I don't care. When it's ready, it's ready. That's
exciting. Well, I will look forward to listening in, because yes, I was a big fan of your book. Okay. And Peter, I'm going to let you go because I have I've kidnapped you for 10 extra minutes. I'm sorry about that. But it's such a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you, because they're intelligent questions. I've done some interviews where you obviously did your homework. I greatly appreciate it. I greatly appreciate all the stuff that you're doing, and good luck with everything that you're doing. Really, really, really.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll be in touch. I'll send you over what we've done so you can see it.
You approve it. I trust you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. See ya. Have a lovely day.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.